I see everyone joining again. We are live. Slowly seeing the attendees come in. We've got 17, 18, 22. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all again. If you're returning, if you're new, we've got a heck of a talk for you this afternoon. Before we bring out Max, I'd like to hand this over to Dean Melway, who is the Special Advisor for READ Initiative and Chair of Enable Ottawa 2020. Dean, take it away.
Thank you, John. It's good to be back. Hi, everybody. We've had a great couple of days, and now this is our final day of Enable Ottawa. And I have the pleasure, although I'm not sure how I could do it in 2 minutes, of introducing my friend and colleague, Max Brault. Max and I have go way back together. We've studied together. We've worked together. I can't list all his accomplishments. There isn't room or time for me to do that. But just to say that he just never stops, and he's now moved into a whole new venture with BDO, which is really exciting. I'm looking forward to working with him through that and learning more. And without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to my friend Max Brault.
Thank you very much, Dean. Thank you for the kind words, and you actually put a tear in my eye. You know, it's always great in my career to be introduced by somebody I highly respect and revere. So thank you, Dean. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for joining this afternoon, especially for some of us who happen to be in some nice areas where it's nice and sunny. Thank you for attaching, listening in. I appear to be the last person speaking to this lovely virtual crowd, and how lovely everybody looks this afternoon. Anyways, that's my joke for the day. You've been hearing, if you guys have been listening in for the last 2 days, you've heard from Mayan Ziv and Jeff Wilbond and Mike Gifford, just to name a few. And you guys have been have had quite a great group of people to listen to talk. But one of the things that I noticed in most of all of their talks, maybe not so much in Mike Gifford's recent one, is that you got a sense that everybody's regular routines or business plans were effectively thrown out the window in the last 13 weeks. And we could all say that all of us who are paying attention to this particular conversation, can say, yeah, Max, we've all gotten some kind of, pounding because of the COVID environment we're living in. And I'm hoping to do some talking here with you guys and highlight some things you guys are probably already aware, but hopefully bring on some things you guys are not. But towards the end, we'll talk about how I think we can move forward. And I like to start this conversation by using a paraphrase by Ken Fallin from the Wall Street Journal. He best described this experience that we're going through in a really unique way. And I'm going to just use his quote here, if you guys don't mind. So the last 13 weeks have effectively, we've been in a lockdown world, potentially with tremendous socially and financial consequences, which comes across as totally irrational. I guarantee you guys have had the same things I've had, walking around going, what we're going through is totally irrational. It doesn't make any sense. We know something needs to be done. And then he ends his quote by saying this, that it feels like it's an elephant being attacked by a house cat. And that frustrated and trying to avoid the cat, the elephant accidentally jumps off the cliff and dies. I mean, this is the kind of environment we feel in. I mean, some moments I know that I'm gonna go away. There's a lot of opportunities, and sometimes the next day I'm kind of like, I have no clue where we're going. This doesn't look too great. But I get to tell you that there is a lot of positive stuff that are gonna come out of this. And so my discussion, I want to put a little bit more sense of urgency and a little bit more sense to you guys that there's a clock on the community. And I'll tell you why, and I'm going to explain to you why I think there's an urgency here. But before we go forward, I just want to talk a little bit about the past, because I think it's important before we talk about the future, we need to talk about the past. And, what we're going through right now has been exhibited several times You know, in the last 50 to 60 years, possibly 70 years, we have gone through these kind of crises. Yet this is the first time I can think of where persons with disabilities actually kind of have a stake in it, and we actually have a voice. The last time this happened, we as a community were so bogged down by dealing with the Pandora's box of eugenics. And so our hands were quite full just fighting on that front. The last time a last big pandemic happened at this level, the United Nations were just created. And they were developed, you know, to deal with all the world peace and to deal with generations of rivalries. But since then, you know, the UN has been created, has created the Convention of Persons with Disabilities, which our Canadian government signed on a few decades ago. And just recently, and we're going to have the 1 year anniversary of this in, if I do my math right, in about 17 days, the Canadian Accessibility Act, or sorry, it's the Accessibility Canada Act. So we have all the building blocks now. And while the coronavirus has led to unprecedented restrictions for billions of people and for many with disabilities, the lockdown has paradoxically opened up the world. And what I mean by that is I can't think of another time where, you know, we finally have access to some really awesome things. Up until about 5 months ago, if you wanted to go and take a look at what was going on in the museums and do a virtual tour of museums around the world, that didn't exist. Now, pick a museum, go take a look. You'll be able to literally virtually walk through museums that you might not have likely have ever visited. It's kind of fun. Look at the working environment. That's changed overnight. We went from all working to some degree in an office setting to now we're all at home. I would say that outside of certain particular people, that 90% of the workforce has at one point or another in the last 13 weeks work from home. Of course, this is putting aside the medical staff. And then, you know, there's also been what I would call a social awakening in virtual space where, yeah, you might not have been used to hanging out with your friends virtually, but now you're talking to friends you haven't probably spoken to in a few years. Maya Ziv mentioned that there seems to be a lot more conversations with people that you lost track with. And what have you done in the last 13 weeks? But I want to talk about moving forward here about some key 5 areas that are going to be trending for the next little while that people really should put some thought towards. And the first one I put down is commuting. How are we going to start commuting around the city when things start opening up? For some of us use the regular mass transit systems. How is that going to be affected? I know for me, for a personal problem, I can't put on and off a mask. I actually have to ask somebody to put on and off a mask for me. How's that going to cause some issues if I'm going to take a bus? Or here in Ottawa, take the LRT? And what about some individuals who take the handy transits, right? What is that going to look like? And so there needs to be some really in-depth conversations about how that's going to look like and how we as a community are going to be making sure that we are not affected by these kind of changes. The second item that's going to be trending is quite obvious, and which I was mentioning earlier, is workspace. You know, here in Ottawa, one of the biggest ongoing trends is workplace 2.0. I used to call it 2. Nothing because it didn't really work and effectively for persons with disabilities. And if anything, in many cases, you know, universal design was not being accepted, and to a certain level, it was being chipped away. And now all of a sudden, universal design seems to have the answer for a lot of things. There are some major groups of thinking going on right now about how are we going to invite people back into an environment that literally 14 weeks ago we were trying to cram everybody into pods. I mean, at one point I remember looking at one particular setup where they were trying to put 6 people in a space where 2 people used to work. So now we got to go back to the drawing board. We now need to figure out how we can have 6 people work in a space of 16 people. So that really is going to challenge our workspaces. Another area where it's going to be trending is going to be email versus video conferencing. the COVIDian environment has handled the workforce in a grand scale of opportunity to experience ways of operating. I can only speak by myself. For the last few weeks, I've been on the phone as much as I've ever been in my career. At one point, I felt like a young person in high school again, discovering the phone as a mean way of communicating. It was a great way to talk to people. But now I'm starting to what they call now zoomed out. I had to about 4 or 5 weeks ago start talking to my staff and people around me saying, do we really need to talk? Can we just go back to emailing me, ask me a question, and I'll during the day try to find a way of getting back to you. I found that everybody wanted to Zoom me, everybody wanted to call me, and it just got a little ridiculous. I don't know if that's been happening with people, but there needs to be some etiquette put around that. The next trend, which I discovered is a great little terminology, is digital nomads. Something that David Cook coined from his recent article of the Wall Street Journal. And, we're becoming this, group of people within the video area. And one of the major rethink is need to massive office buildings, embracing digital and government and digital offices and companies. Like, how are we going to do that? The great thing is that where municipal and provincial and federal government services are slow to have been embracing this technology, they've now woken up and said, hey, this might be an actual fundamental way where we can work with the public. And, I'm seeing, as Mike was mentioning, the light switch turning on with a lot of people that, whereas in a lot of governments, there was this tendency to be resistant of technology. Now there seems to be some kind of embrace. I'm going to quote a writer that writes a lot in the Citizen about the federal government, Catherine May. She says that technology and distance working will be eliminated the divide and allow governments to recruit a workforce from better represents the country and to help resolve regional alienation dividing the country. This is one of those key things that I think in about 20 years from now, Ottawa might actually be one of the most affected cities from this COVIDian environment, because for once, it won't matter where a federal government employee works. And whereas it's typically been coming to work to Ottawa, it won't matter where you work because you just need to open up your computer and boom, you represent the federal government. My last trend, which is no surprise to anybody, will be traditional 8-hour workday and 5 days a week. Once again, going back to trend number 4, this idea has already been challenged by the IT revolution of the 80s. I know I've been staying in my working environment and I have not been confined to a typical work week. I know that my deliverables is no longer defined by a Monday, Tuesday, or Friday, but it's more deliverable by how much time do I have, how much time do I need to deliver this. And it's more of, yeah, I can get that within about, 4 or 5 days. But it's no longer, I'm going to get it to you on a Friday. I'm going to get it to you in 4 or 5 days. And if that happens to fall on a Sunday, so be it. And, we're also challenging our 8:30 to 5:30 prefixes. So this, I think, is going to become one of the things that literally will be thrown out of the window. And then I'm going to give you guys a bonus trend. One of the things I'm noticing is that everybody now is doing a crash course in e-commerce and digital payments. I have to tell you, one of the biggest things my wife and I have always had problems with is whenever we want to buy a service or we want to get something, one of the things we always ask people, and we've been asking it for almost 20 years, is, do you do e-transfers? And for the first time ever, everybody's accepting e-transfers, which is absolutely fantastic. So let me go back to Ottawa here. Let me talk about some things we're going to see in Ottawa. And what I mean by Ottawa is I mean the federal government. Long before the pandemic struck, questions have been raised as to why nearly 40 to 50% of the federal public service were clustered in the National Capital Region, as I mentioned earlier. In a snap, two fingers, thousands of federal public servants are now working from home. Yet these servants did not have the technology to do so. I could tell you my wife had some issues, and some of the people that I've long worked with for almost 20 years were calling me up and saying, I'm having some issues. How the hell do I work? And now we're starting to see them finally starting to function and them coming back into the working space. I predict that it won't be a long time before politicians will be asking why these home offices are in the national capital region. Why can't these jobs be across the country? And that's a good thing, because with the Accessibility Canada Act, one of the requirements is to hire 5,000 new individuals with disabilities into the federal public service. And now I think it's a great thing that they're no longer constrained by hiring a good chunk of those people within the Ottawa capital region. Now they have to look at it to see how they can hire people from corner to corner to corner of this country. And that's a great thing for people with disabilities. Again, the COVID pandemic has handed the public service a grand scale opportunity to experiment with new ways of operating, including rethinking the need of massive office buildings, as I was making alluded to earlier, and embracing digital government to its fullest extent. What public servants need to learn the next few months is by working remotely and how to jointly deal with the bureaucracy where everybody is no longer within eyesight and they're working from home. And I think in about 10 years from now, the public service will be a smaller group, and be more distributed across the country, and it will be flatter in a hierarchy. And to a certain degree, we're going to see an acceleration of embracing of technology and new advancements, which is a good thing for persons with disabilities, because we might actually see the federal public service embrace the idea that some of their internal systems and external systems are not accessible for individuals from various disability groups. So let's talk about business, because as Dean alluded to, I'm a vice president of strategies and operations at BDO. And one of the interesting things about BDO is we have close to 65,000 clients across the country. So we're having a large amount of time talking about how this COVIDian environment is impacting them, both on an HR level, both on a resource base, how this is affecting their income, how they're going to deal with, rent. We're getting a multitude of questions. And, the thing is there's no simple answer. The three trends we're seeing right now in businesses is, again, how to undertake meetings. The second one is basically how to organize teams, because teams were so easily designed when you were able to walk into an environment and go, Bill, Bob, Jane, and Dope, you're all in one team, you go and do that. Now, when you're working from home, the concept of teaming is kind of a little bit put off. And the third one, and this is where I get a little concerned, and we're going to talk about this, is that companies are going to take care of their full-time employees. And yet the individuals who are considered freelancers or contractors, that environment's going to change dramatically for those individuals. And what I mean by that is that there's going to be a divide now, because companies are now going to get into a protectionist mode. They're going to take care of the individuals that have been employees prior to this environment, and they're going to find out ways to keep them happy and safe and making sure that they're productive. And yet the individuals who are what we will deem outsiders are going to be essentially the losers in this process. Because the question that corporations are going to start asking is, out of our employees, what can we get out of them? And there's no longer going to be a reluctance as you're really busy, so we're going to go hire a contractor. It's going to be, hey, you're working from home, you can put in an extra 2 hours, can you provide this? So we're going to have to see some rethink on this. And this is where it gets a little dangerous for what I would call junior folks or persons with disabilities. Because think about it this way. This is one of the biggest issues from working from home. You're going to be missing out on the day-to-day interaction of expertise you would get from guidance with working with other people. Your professional network is going to be somewhat challenged. You're going to have to think about, how am I going to interact with people that typically when I interact with them, I'm trying to extract some kind of information for myself, especially for the new people coming in. And again, for people with disabilities, there's no longer what I call the hanging around the water cooler. Well, nowadays it's hanging around the coffee machine, and being able to get an understanding of what's going on in your environment. So I'm going to quickly summarize a few of my facts here, and we'll get into what I was talking about, urgency. So here are three really very simple facts I want you guys to keep in mind. Governments have promised trillions of dollars to keep the economy on life support. What does that mean? What is the impact of that? And when the bill comes in, how is that going to affect us? Two, it's been painfully clear that the pandemic has only further exposed the need for Canada to address the underfunding of services for persons with disabilities. At this time, we have no systemic approach to all the funding that the persons with disability services, are getting. In addition to that, the third line is that the post-pandemic debt regime might resemble that of the immediate post-war era. I'm assuming that most people who are, listening to me speak today weren't around just after World War I or World War II. But I can reassure you that, the only engine of consumption for the next 12 to 24 months will be governments. I don't see corporations. I do not see a lot of businesses out there spending a lot of money for the foreseeable future. If anything, they're going to be hoarding onto their money and trying to figure out how can we deal with this new environment. If you go and ask any of the new shops, some of them will tell you that they have a huge bill. Some of them have spent close to around $6,000 to $8,000 just putting all that plastic filters that you now see when you go in there. And then they have to buy the masks and the gloves because they can't assume that you're going to come in with them. Those are all additional costs that these corporations did not have planned. So my point I really want to get to here in Canada is that, and I've been hearing this lately, is the word reset. I do not think this is a valid terminology we need to be accepting. I do not want this to be a reset. What we need to do is we need to think about this as a generational rethink on everything we do in our community. This means that some of the very hard questions will need to be asked. And we as a community should be ready for the impact that this hard, responses that we're going to be hearing. To quote a journalist from, her name is Caroline Casey from England, she had this great quote I just read today. And here it is. It's disabled people are not just vulnerable, we're valuable. Please do not allow this pandemic for us to go back and switch on the horrible old narratives, in which are about poor disabled people, poor weak people, poor sick people. No, we as a community, disabled community, by God, and this is her quote, by God, we have the ability, the potential, the resources, the brains, and the valuable contributions to give. And let's make sure that that's not lost. We must avoid doing what we have done effectively in the past in a certain degree. What we're doing today is siloing. The community, the governments, and businesses cannot hunker down in an individual room somewhere, map out with a strategy, and then come out and sell it for us to all buy into. We need to see these conversations as open as possible. So therefore, I'm saying this right now that, if anybody from Cultural's group, let's see those conversations that are happening with her group that she assembled. Let's see them online. Let's hear the conversations. Let's see what they're talking about. And let's make sure that they're going down the right direction. I want to see a little bit more transparency. And I also want to see businesses being part of the process. There is chaos. I'm not going to lie to you. There is uncertainty. But yet, the future seems to be bleak in the near future. But crisis is also creates character, especially when there is no clear roadmap or tried or tested leadership principles that we can to contribute. Once a crisis is in motion, turning it into an opportunity requires a new ways of seeing things, thinking, responding, something we draw on from each other. But right now, as I mentioned, there's a golden opportunity for us and all parties nationally to discuss on how we can move forward. We need to look at the past and acknowledge what has happened, but we need to have honest conversations with all parties. And we need to have and accept the fact that some people will not like what we hear. So I've come up with some 4 basic things we need to move forward on. number one, we need to develop a national dialogue. Leaders listen to leaders. That's a fact. Define national, provincial, and business resources for the next decade. Develop new direction on involvement of persons with disabilities in all aspects of Canadian society. Again, this is a generational rethink. Let's use this opportunity. Create an international movement that ensures society continues to become more accessible by integrating the voices of disabled people in the design and development of policy, technology, and infrastructure. But in order to get this right, the industry needs to include disabled people and universal design alongside with Canadian businesses, and of course, regulatory frameworks and policies that will enable the changing, and the disabled people must be consulted and not get forgotten once this is all done. So in closing, I'm going to use a quote from my favorite rock star, and anybody who knows me will laugh because you'll find out who my favorite rock star is. We're humans. We need moments that reassure us that we're not all alone, and that we understand that we are important, and most important, we need each other. David Brault from the Foo Fighters. And my last statement is, this too shall pass. Let's use this opportunity to ensure that we put in fundamental changes that will last generations. So that's my speech. I'm now open to dealing with any questions that people might have. And I am going to my screen right now. Here we go.
Hi, Max. I'm here too to help if you need it. Just let me know, okay?
Yep, I'm just going through my questions here. See, I'm going to go to the first one. So the first question is from, I can't read your name and I apologize, but you know who you are. Yeah. How people with disabilities are getting support from working from home. Is there no support from employers? Can they request support from the government? That is a brilliant question, because the thing is that at the end of the day, this is a cost factor. I know from my corporation, because of my title and my level, I was able to call up my IT guy. He was able to show up, set up my office and make sure it was all set up. And I was able to purchase everything I can. I have made sure that all my employees have the same thing. But the thing is that this is a golden opportunity for the federal government to have a particular fund out there to ensure that corporations, ensure that people with disabilities have access to ensure that they work from home. This is one of those things that is a brilliant question. And I don't have an answer for you, but I know the answer is relying on some funds for us to access. But I would say that most corporations, from when I talk to CEOs, are providing these resources to individuals. Some of the smaller ones, their resources are a little stretched. Now, let's see. I'm going to just see if there's any more questions. There's. Yeah, so I don't know who asked this question about the resistance of ASL for media announcements. And that seems now that the consideration for future, which is great. And here's the thing I'm going to go on the record with. One of the things I'm really proud of is one of my backgrounds is that I was worked with Yasmin Arosh in ensuring that the particular Accessibility Canada Act was written in particular certain ways and had involvement by certain people. One of the things that I constantly pushed for was ensuring that sign language was one of the key communication factors that needed to be considered. And I have to be honest with you, whoever sent this question, one of the things that actually got me a little bit depressed is when all of this started going sideways with the COVID environment. One of the things that I did not enjoy seeing was that our American counterparts had sign language interpreters, and for whatever the little COVID environment coverage they had, and yet every time I turned on to see the Prime Minister at 11 o'clock, there was no sign language interpreters. It took 3 weeks before we saw that. And to this day, you know, a lot of us fought to get that there, but I do not know what made them finally flick on the switch. Yet, sadly, all I'm seeing in this is with a few premiers that have the sign language interpreters, And we no longer see it with Ford anymore, but I think he's off the side. You got to go to another channel, but don't quote me. But I'm not seeing that. At one point it was everywhere, and now it's slowly dissipating again. And I don't know if that's because of resources. Now I'm going to see right now, totally. One concern I have. So I'm going to read this and then I'll answer. This is from Susan Foster. One concern I have with the 9 to 5 schedule change with remote working. How do we maintain work-life balance? Good question. I'm just going to read the rest of your question here. And avoid exploitation. And some of us, myself included, are more parents with disabilities with children. Doesn't allow flexibility around work hours, plus pluses the minus of to consider. Okay, so there's 3 kind of questions there to unpack. The first one is, how do we deal with work-life balance if you have kids and with everything else? And that's been a challenge for a lot of people. And that's a challenge at best of times for non-disabled people on how they're dealing with it. And then when you put in kids in there, how are you going to deal with making sure your kids are feeling like they're being involved, you're entertaining your kids, you're educating your kids? And, you know, that's another thing that's a major question. I don't have an answer for you on that one. But that's a major problem with people with disabilities moving forward. And I do honestly have a soft spot for single mothers or single fathers dealing with the situation and are disabled as well. Because how are you going to deal with your working environment and at the same time dealing with your kids? That's something we need to think about. And I wish I had an answer. As for the flexibilities and hours and plus and minus, you know, again, the good news is that depending on the work you're doing, you might be able to work out with your employers that the work will be get done. Just don't put me on a 9 to 5 schedule. Just give me a time when you need it, and I'll try to do my best to get it there at the time that it needs to be done. Sorry, I don't have the answers for everything, guys, but I'll try. Can you have this? Can't move to what you Nope. How you mentioned? Okay, so by Kathy, I mentioned that there's an initiative to hire 5,000 people with disabilities. In what areas of occupation does this apply to for university students and any disciplines? So here's I do have an answer for this one. When I was talking about the 5,000, this is for the federal government. They are in the process right now. If they're not rolling this out, they will be rolling it out soon, about recruiting 5,000 individuals. Now, I don't know if that's going to happen in one shot, if it's going to be 200 to 500 every year. This is something you need to go and research. The answers do lie, and here it is. And I will ask John or Dean to post this. It's with the Public Service Commission. If you guys are really interested in finding work, go ahead and email 2 things. Email the Public Service Commission and ask them that you want to be aware on any kind of hiring initiatives or recruitment drives that will be occurring for persons with disabilities today and in the near future. And also email your member of parliament. Make sure that they are aware that you want to find some work and that you want to be tapped into whatever kind of initiatives that the federal government will be putting into play to hire. The third thing you could do is that Minister Cultural constantly says that she will answer any questions that she gets from the community. Don't be afraid to email her and ask her or write her a letter and say that you would be interested in any jobs that would be popping up by the Federal Public Service, and that ask her to keep you informed on whenever these opportunities come up with. Remember, she works for you. So don't be afraid to ask her to do some work for you. I went to the COVID care center yesterday, and they did not have any way of accommodating those with hearing impairments. Interesting. So all I can do right now, Jennifer, is I'm going to take your comment and I'm going to send it to the mayor on your behalf. I also send it to some of the councillors that I've been working with here in the Ottawa area to ensure that they are aware of this. Because I can honestly tell you that the city of Ottawa in particular is working steadfastly to make sure that all individuals are accommodated to the best of their abilities. So I'll make them aware of that. If you don't mind, I will take a copy of this and I will send it off to one of my colleagues. And just give me a second as I make sure I put a note in this, because if I don't put it down, Jennifer, I will forget it. So just give me 1 second.
Yeah, go ahead and do that, Max. We're going to start to wrap up. There are a number of other questions in the Q&A tab. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to capture all those and make sure that you get a copy, and then maybe we can figure out if there's some sort of way you can address some of those after stream, if that's okay with you. Not right away, of course, but you know, when
You
you
want
have
me to answer a few of those questions? Because I just was about to go there.
Yeah,
So,
we're just getting close to time here. We've got about 2 minutes left. So if you want to choose one
that I
to
am.
answer from there, that's fairly short. That would be great. We've got a good one here from Karen Biveld. She says, before the pandemic, there were discussions about how to accommodate persons with episodic disabilities. Do you think any legislation will be put forward to help people in this situation, or has that now been tabled until life gets back to normal?
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. Episodic disability is part of the ACA. And again, I don't know the conversations that are taking place with Minister Cultural. Like again, they're closed door conversations with some key people. So what I would do is, again, remember how I was saying about the 5,000 people. Take your question and email it to Cultural. Again, remember one thing, and if there's one thing you guys hear from me today, is that people that work for the federal government are your employee. They get paid by you. They get paid by your tax dollars. So you have the right to demand questions. And in this particular situation where you have some uncertainty, do not be afraid to politely ask them some answers for some of your questions. As a person with a BDO who works at BDO with businesses, I am willing to work with anybody who's willing to work with businesses and ensuring that we as the business community hire more persons with disabilities. Because I can tell you one thing, and the conversations that I've been having with a lot of CEOs, we are very interested in hiring more people with disabilities. We're just trying to figure out right now how this means with the COVID environment, but we're hoping in the next few months that you're going to see more and more people with disabilities hired across this country. So thank you very much. Thank you for giving me the time. And I'm going to ask John to put up my social media stuff so that you guys can click on that, follow me, or email me at a later date, and I'll be more than welcome to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks again, Max, for your wonderful presentation. I'm glad that we got a ton of conversation started. That's really what it's all about today. Like I said, is that starting that conversational, piece and really keeping the momentum going after the event is live, and we've all gone and taken a break. So hopefully that we can continue to keep that momentum, and like I said, we're sharing our questions on to those people who can actually generate that change is great advice. So thanks again. Thanks for everyone for joining us. We will be back with an extended Q&A session with a number of other speakers in about 2 minutes. So I will see you all very shortly. Thanks again, everyone.